I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these stories. You read them online, you shake your head, and you think, how could someone be so blind? But the truth is, when you love someone, you don't just wear rose-colored glasses. You actively build the illusion. Until the day it shatters. I'm Mark. I'm 32 years old, an architect. I work hard, and up until the morning of my wedding, as I stood there fixing my watch in the mirror, I thought I was the luckiest guy alive.
My fiancée, Chloe, was stunning, fiercely ambitious, and completely obsessed with appearances. Her family came from the illusion of old money. Her father, Richard, was a man who demanded respect, but hadn't actually made a successful investment in a decade. We were throwing an $80,000 wedding, mostly paid for by me, but Richard, the control-freak patriarch, couldn't stand not having his name attached. He insisted on being the primary signatory on all the vendor contracts to ensure top-tier service. I let him play the big man.
Then there was Liam, Chloe's flamboyant gay best friend since college. He was a permanent fixture in our lives. I paid for his dinners, helped him out, thought of him as family. Fast forward to 9 a.m. on the day of the wedding. I had bought Chloe a vintage diamond and sapphire necklace as a surprise. I walked down the long, quiet hallway of the estate to leave it in her bridal suite. When I reached her door, I noticed it was cracked open just an inch. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped. I heard a laugh, not her polite giggle, but that deep, intimate laugh she only used when we were alone in the dark. Then I heard Liam's voice. It wasn't his usual high-energy tone. It was deep, masculine, and grounded. "You sure you're ready to marry the human ATM, babe?" he said. I looked through the crack. In the heavy shadows of the room, I saw them embracing on the sofa. Let's just say they weren't reviewing the seating chart. My hand froze in the air. The velvet box felt like lead. Chloe's voice was crystal clear. "Mark is safe, Liam," she said. "He's boring, but he's a safety net. After the honeymoon, we'll get back to our usual schedule. I'm not losing you just because I'm wearing his ring." Liam chuckled, bragging about how 3 years of pretending to be into dudes was exhausting. The anger bypassed my heart and went straight to my brain. I took out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. I stood there like a ghost for 4 agonizing minutes, recording every disgusting whisper. Then I silently backed away, walked to my suite, locked the door, and sat in a leather armchair. I had exactly 2.5 hours. I called the elite client line at my bank. I reported my platinum card as compromised in a fraud scheme, ordered an immediate freeze, and issued a chargeback on the pending $40,000 final payment to the venue. The funds were legally locked. Because Richard's name was on the legal contracts, all that financial liability legally transferred to his pompous shoulders. Next, I called my brother Dave, my best man. I told him to come to my room alone and played the audio. He wanted to kill Liam, but I told him we were doing this my way. I transferred the audio file to a black USB drive, printed a screenshot of my frozen bank account, and put both into a small black envelope. I handed it to Dave. Step 3 was the vows. I took out the beautiful, romantic speech I had spent weeks writing. I stared at the words for a moment, feeling a final wave of absolute disgust, and tore the paper into pieces. I threw it in the trash. I grabbed a blank piece of hotel stationery and a heavy black pen. I started aggressively crossing out my old promises in my head. I had a completely new speech to deliver. At 1 p.m., the ocean breeze was perfect. 200 of our closest friends and Richard's wealthy business associates were seated outdoors. I stood at the altar. And then she appeared. Chloe walked down the aisle looking like an absolute angel. Richard handed her off to me with a firm nod. The officiant began speaking. Chloe went first, crying perfectly timed, delicate tears, calling me her rock and her one true love. The guests were visibly moved. Then it was my turn. I unclipped the microphone and held it in my hand. I pulled out my single folded sheet of paper. "Chloe," I started, my voice echoing over the silent crowd, When I met you, I thought I had found a partner I could trust with my life. But life has a funny way of showing you the truth. And sometimes, the truth is that you're just a safety net. I looked at her with absolute freezing calm.
Chloe's perfect smile faltered. I promise to always provide a clear picture of reality, I continued, making direct, unblinking eye contact. But I cannot promise to be your human ATM, and I absolutely refuse to be your boring insurance policy. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Murmurs erupted. Chloe's eyes widened in sheer panic, her face turning completely pale as the reality of the situation finally crashed down on her.
I dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden floor with a loud screech. I gave a subtle nod to Dave. He calmly walked off the altar, stepped up to Richard in the front row, and handed him the black envelope. Richard opened it, looking down at the USB drive in the bank printout. His face turned a dangerous shade of red as pure shock took over. "The wedding is canceled," I announced to the crowd. "Richard, the vendors will be coming to you for the $80,000 balance. Good luck."
I didn't stop there. I turned my head and locked eyes directly with Liam, who was sitting in the front row. The color had instantly drained from his face. He looked like he had been struck by lightning, sweating and exposed. 3 years of pretending, Liam, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. You're right. You do deserve an Oscar. He shrank back into his chair, looking around at the disgusted faces of the guests.
Chloe was shaking violently, tears of actual terror streaming down her face. She tried to grab my arm, begging me to wait. "I love myself enough to let you go," I interrupted. I turned my back on her and walked straight down the center aisle. I left the estate, ignoring the chaos erupting behind me, the screaming, the absolute confusion. I walked out the heavy iron gates and got directly into the black SUV I had scheduled an hour prior.
My phone exploded with calls and texts, but I turned it off. I had a first-class ticket to Maui, and I spent the next 2 weeks drinking top-shelf whiskey on the beach, completely unreachable. The fallout was biblical. Richard had to liquidate stocks to avoid being sued by the venue. Liam abandoned Chloe the second the money dried up. The moral of the story? Guard your bank accounts and never call the man paying for your life an ATM.